Sarah's stomach tightened. "And what have you been thinking?" Elise looked at her, her expression conflicted. "I've spent so many years believing that love wasn't worth the risk. I saw what it did to my parents, how my father treated my mother. I promised myself I'd never put myself in a position to be hurt like that." Sarah's face softened. "But we've built a life together, Elise. We've loved each other through everything." Elise nodded, tears glistening in her eyes. "We have, and I'll always be grateful for you, Sarah. You've been my rock. But watching Gabriel with Jane, seeing how he's willing to change for her, for their child, it's made me realize something. I've been holding myself back from love in a way I didn't even understand until now." Sarah's expression darkened. "What are you saying?" Elise took a deep breath, her voice trembling. "I met someone. It wasn't planned, and I didn't go looking for it." The farmhouse sat in the middle of nowhere, cloaked in shadows under the pale moonlight. The crunch of gravel beneath the tires was the only sound as Gabriel, Elise, and the police arrived. Their breaths were heavy with anticipation and fear, their hearts pounding as they prepared to face the unknown. Gabriel clenched his fists, his mind racing with images of his child in Priska's hands. Elise stepped out of the car, her resolve unshaken despite the anxiety in her eyes. She exchanged a look with Gabriel, a silent promise that they would bring the baby home. The officers moved with calculated precision, their flashlights cutting through the darkness. The farmhouse loomed ahead, its windows dark except for a faint flicker of light from one room. "That must be it," Elise whispered, her voice trembling. Gabriel nodded, his jaw tight. "We're not leaving without him." The lead officer motioned for silence as they approached the door. He tested the handle. It was locked. With a nod, another officer moved forward, a crowbar in hand. The door gave way with a loud crack, and the team stormed inside. The air inside the farmhouse was thick, the smell of mildew and neglect almost overpowering. The officers fanned out, checking each room. Gabriel stayed close to Elise, his eyes darting around for any sign of Priska or the baby. A faint cry broke the silence. Gabriel's heart lurched. "Upstairs!" one of the officers called out, and they all rushed to the source of the sound. In a small, dimly lit room, Priska sat in a rocking chair, holding the baby. Her face was calm, almost serene, but her eyes betrayed her instability. She looked up as they entered, a twisted smile on her lips. "You're too late," she said, her voice eerily calm. "This child doesn't belong to you." Gabriel stepped forward, his voice firm but trembling. "Give me my son." Priska's grip on the baby tightened. "Your son? You didn't even know he existed until I showed you the truth. You don't deserve him." "Let him go," Elise said, her voice steady despite the fear in her chest. "He's just a baby. Don't hurt him." Priska's eyes flicked to Elise, her expression unreadable. For a moment, she seemed to falter, the weight of her delusions cracking under the pressure. But then her resolve hardened. "You think you're better than me? None of you deserve him." The lead officer stepped forward, his voice calm but commanding. "Priska, it's over. Put the baby down." Priska's gaze darted around the room, realizing she was cornered. Her breaths quickened, and for a moment, Gabriel thought she might do something reckless. But then Elise stepped forward, her hands raised in a gesture of peace. "Priska," Elise said gently, her voice soft but firm. "You've been hurt. I can see that. But this isn't the way. Let the baby go, and we can talk about how to help you." Priska's lips trembled, her grip on the baby loosening ever so slightly. Gabriel held his breath, ready to spring forward if she showed any sign of harming his son. Finally, Priska broke. Tears streamed down her face as she handed the baby to Elise, her body shaking with sobs. The officers moved in quickly, restraining her as she collapsed to the floor, her cries echoing through the room. Gabriel rushed to Elise, his hands trembling as he reached for his child. The baby let out a small wail but calmed instantly as Gabriel held him close, his heart swelling with a mix of relief and love. Elise placed a hand on Gabriel's shoulder, her own tears streaming down her face. "He's safe," she whispered. "We did it." Priska was led away in handcuffs, her cries fading into the night. Gabriel and Elise stood in the room, the weight of the ordeal settling over them. But for the first time in weeks, there was a glimmer of hope. Priska was led away in handcuffs, her cries fading into the night. Gabriel and Elise stood in the room, the weight of the ordeal settling over them. But for the first time in weeks, there was a glimmer of hope. The days that followed were a whirlwind for Jane. When Gabriel returned home with his baby, she broke down, holding him close and promising never to let anything come between them again. But as the adrenaline faded, she realized her journey was far from over. Jane enrolled in online classes, determined to finish her degree. Balancing her studies with motherhood was no small feat, but she tackled it with unwavering determination. Every late-night feeding, every hour spent studying with her son sleeping in her arms was a testament to her resilience. Her experience with Priska ignited a fire within her. She started a blog, sharing her story and advocating for women's rights. Her posts quickly gained traction, and soon she was a voice for young mothers, survivors of medical malpractice, and anyone who felt powerless. Gabriel was a changed man. The ordeal had shaken him to his core, forcing him to confront his mistakes and take responsibility. He began attending therapy to address his guilt and started volunteering at organizations that supported single mothers and children in need. He also became an active part of Jane and the baby's life. From late-night diaper changes to attending parenting classes, he threw himself into fatherhood with a passion that surprised even himself. His bond with Jane deepened, built on mutual respect and a shared love for their son. Their relationship evolved slowly, each moment building on the last. They found comfort in co-parenting, their shared responsibilities bringing them closer. Gabriel often stayed late after putting the baby to bed, sharing quiet conversations with Jane about their hopes and fears. One evening, as they sat on the couch, Jane looked at Gabriel and smiled. "Thank you," she said softly. "For what?" he asked, surprised. "For being here," she replied. "For staying." Gabriel reached for her hand, his touch gentle. "I'll always be here, Jane, for both of you." Elise and Sarah had built a life together on a foundation of shared values, respect, and love. For years, they had raised Jane as a united front, navigating the challenges of being a same-sex couple in a society that wasn't always kind. But their relationship wasn't without its cracks, small fractures they had both ignored in the name of family and duty. After Priska's arrest and the rescue of Jane's baby, Elise began to change. It started subtly. She grew quieter during their usual evening conversations, spent more time away from home, and seemed distracted even when she was present. Sarah noticed but tried to brush it off, convincing herself that Elise was simply processing the trauma of recent events in her own way. One evening, as they sat at the dinner table after putting the baby to sleep, Sarah decided to address the growing distance. "You've been different lately," Sarah said carefully, her voice tinged with concern. "Is something on your mind?" Elise hesitated, her fork hovering over her plate. "I've just been thinking a lot," she admitted. "About everything. Jane, the baby, our family, my life." Sarah's stomach tightened. "And what have you been thinking?" Elise looked at her, her expression conflicted. "I've spent so many years believing that love wasn't worth the risk. I saw what it did to my parents, how my father treated my mother. I promised myself I'd never put myself in a position to be hurt like that." Sarah's face softened. "But we've built a life together, Elise. We've loved each other through everything." Elise nodded, tears glistening in her eyes. "We have, and I'll always be grateful for you, Sarah. You've been my rock. But Watching Gabriel with Jane, seeing how he's willing to change for her, for their child. It's made me realize something. I've been holding myself back from love in a way I didn't even understand until now. Sarah's expression darkened. What are you saying? Elise took a deep breath, her voice trembling. I met someone. It wasn't planned, and I didn't go looking for it. But he makes me feel something I didn't know I was missing. The room fell silent, the weight of Elise's words crashing down like a tidal wave. Sarah's heart ached, a sharp pain she hadn't expected. How long? Sarah finally asked, her voice barely above a whisper. It's new, Elise said quickly. I haven't done anything behind your back, Sarah, I wouldn't, but I can't ignore how I feel. It's made me realize that maybe we're not meant to be together anymore. Sarah pushed back her chair and stood, her hands trembling. After everything we've been through, Elise? After all these years, you're just walking away. Elise's own tears spilled over now. I'm not walking away from you, Sarah. I'm walking towards something I've never allowed myself to believe in. I've lived my whole life being guarded, afraid to trust anyone the way I saw my mother trust my father, but I'm ready to let that go. Sarah clenched her fists, the hurt bubbling up into anger. And what about me, Elise? Do you think I didn't trust you? That I didn't love you enough? Or is this just about you deciding you want something else? Elise shook her head, her voice breaking. This isn't about you not being enough. You've been everything to me. But I can't keep pretending I don't feel this pull toward something new. It's not fair to you. For weeks, Sarah struggled to come to terms with Elise's decision. She poured herself into caring for Jane and the baby to distract herself from the pain. But late at night, when the house was quiet, she couldn't escape the memories of the life she and Elise had built together. The betrayal stung deeply, not just because Elise had found someone else, but because she had redefined their love as something less than it once was. She was my safe place, Sarah confided in Jane one evening as they sat in the living room. And now I feel like I never really knew her at all. Jane placed a hand on her mother's. It's not about you, Mom. You've given her everything. But maybe she needs to figure out who she is, too. That doesn't take away what you had together. Sarah nodded, but the ache in her chest remained. Elise, meanwhile, began seeing Maxwell, a kind and thoughtful man she had met through her work. Maxwell was patient and understanding, giving Elise the space to process her own emotions while gently encouraging her to embrace vulnerability. Their relationship blossomed slowly, but Elise found herself smiling more, feeling lighter. For the first time, she allowed herself to believe in love without fear of losing herself in it. Elise eventually shared the news with Jane, who was initially hesitant but supportive. I just want you to be happy, Mom, Jane said, and if Maxwell gives you that, then I'm glad. The final conversation between Elise and Sarah was bittersweet. They sat across from each other at the kitchen table, the silence between them heavy with unspoken words. I want you to know, Elise began, that I'll always love you, Sarah. What we had wasn't a mistake. You helped me raise an incredible daughter, and I'll never forget that. Sarah nodded, tears brimming in her eyes. I'll always love you too, Elise, but I need time to figure out who I am without you. Elise reached across the table, placing her hand over Sarah's. Take all the time you need. You deserve happiness, Sarah. Don't let this stop you from finding it. Though their relationship as partners ended, Elise and Sarah remained close, bound by their shared love for Jane and her son. They navigated family gatherings and holidays with grace, their bond transforming into a deep friendship. Sarah found strength in her independence, eventually rediscovering joy in her work and her role as a grandmother. Elise, with Rachel by her side, embraced the love she had once been too afraid to pursue. And though their paths had diverged, Elise and Sarah remained united in their commitment to supporting Jane and her family. proving that love, even when it changes, can endure.